You are listening to The Evidence Locker. Our cases have been researched using open source and archive materials. It deals with true crimes and real people. Each episode is produced with the utmost respect to the victims, their families, and loved ones. It was as warm as a summer's evening would get in Kirkwall, Orkney on June the 2nd, 1994. The sun was still out, as it only sets around 10 p.m. at this time of the year, this far north. Donald Glue, a local businessman, and his family decided to go out to dinner at Mumutaz's Indian Tandoori restaurant. It was the only Indian restaurant in town, and on that Thursday night, there were about 14 customers enjoying the flavors and spices of India. Waiter, 26-year-old Bangladeshi national Shamsuddin Mahmud, clocked in for his second shift that summer. He had only been in the Orkney Islands for 6 weeks and was excited to work at Mumutaz for a second season. Little did Shamsuddin know that this would be his last night alive. As he was serving Donald Glue and his family their meal of curries, rice, and naan bread, a masked gunman walked into the restaurant, pointed a pistol at Shamsuddin's head, and shot him point blank. It would take more than a decade to solve this case, which police referred to as the 1,000-piece puzzle. And even after they arrested a man for this senseless crime, the residents of Orkney were still divided. Was he really the killer? Who shot the kind-hearted and mild-mannered Shamsuddin Mahmud on that fatal summer night in 1994? Shamsuddin Mahmud was born in the capital of Bangladesh, Dhaka. He was the youngest of 7 sons in a family of 11 children. At 24, Shamsuddin, or Shamil as he would introduce himself as, was still living in Bangladesh. He had finished his bachelor's degree in economics from the National University of Bangladesh and had a serious girlfriend. His girlfriend was studying to be a doctor. The future seemed bright for this young couple. But in 1992, after a fight with some friends about his girlfriend, he decided to go to the UK for a while. His eldest brother, Abul Shafuddin, worked in London as a lawyer and took Shamil in. Shamil had aspirations to become a lawyer himself, just like his brother, but after a while, he lost interest in his studies. During his time in the UK, he also stayed in Southampton for a while, working as a waiter. Then, in 1993, his travels took him north, all the way to the scenic Orkney Islands. He saw a waitering job advertised in a newspaper and jumped at the opportunity to go. The islands could not be more different to his native, densely populated, subtropical Bangladesh. But Shamil fell in love with the place. Its rugged shoreline and windswept landscape really appealed to him. He spent 9 months there in 1993, working as a waiter at Mumutaz's Tandoori Indian restaurant. When winter rolled in and cruise ships and tourists took a break from visiting Orkney, Shamil decided to head back to London to stay with his brother. He vowed, however, that he would return to the islands. It had captured his heart and he was drawn to the Orcadian way of life. He continued working as a waiter in England and stayed with Abul. Abul was under the impression that Shamil intended to return to Bangladesh to marry his girlfriend. So when he learned that Shamil had met a woman in Orkney, he was surprised. Abul didn't know much about his brother's new love interest, only that she was a local girl. In Abul's polite way, he would later say that, from his understanding, Shamil's new girlfriend was of easy virtue. He also believed that she owed Shamil some money, about £3,000. In April 1994, it was clear that Shamil had no intention of pursuing his law degree any further. This led to a huge disagreement between the two brothers. They also argued about land inherited from their father. Shamil had had enough. He was ready to return to Orkney. He called Mumtaz to ask if they had a summer job for him. Owner, Moina Mia, was delighted to hear from Shamil. He was good with customers, and in the year before, Moina felt he could count on him as a trustworthy worker. Moina promised Shamil would have a job if he were to return to Orkney. Before long, Shamil was back in Kirkwall. 6 weeks after his arrival, he worked his first shift for the summer at the restaurant. Orkney, or the Orkney Islands, is an archipelago of 70 islands in the Northern Isles of Scotland. Only 20 of these islands are populated, with 20,000 residents altogether. The only way to arrive or leave the islands is by plane or boat. The largest island is called the mainland, and the biggest settlement, Kirkwall, has a population of about 9,000 people. Kirkwall is also the administrative center for the Orkney Islands. Orkney has a long, industrious history, and one is constantly reminded of Norse rule in the 9th century, with icons around the isles like St. Olaf's Church, the town of Stromness, and pubs with names like Torvhag. Since the 15th century, Orkney has been under Scottish rule. However, Orkney has its own sense of pride and identity. It's not uncommon for locals to see themselves as Orcadians first and Scots second. They speak a dialect that distinguishes them from their Scottish neighbors. Native Orcadians are proud about their heritage, and for centuries they have referred to the non-native residents as ferry loopers. With an insular mindset, locals know each other, and more often than not, know each other's business. Crime is pretty much non-existent on the mainland. A car theft would cause a massive uproar, and most definitely make headlines in the local newspaper, The Orcadian. It's not likely that you would get away with a crime in a small town like Kirkwall, where everybody knows everybody. The last murder in Kirkwall, before the Mumtaz restaurant incident, was in 1969. The man who was shot and killed then was a 74-year-old crofter called Andrew Bruce. His murderer was arrested before breakfast the very next morning. Detective Superintendent George Goh was certain the shooting of Shamsuddin Mahmud would be solved quickly. He said what was going through his mind as he was traveling from Inverness in Scotland to start the investigation on the case. Orkney has a village mentality. This is a village crime. People there say you can't pee in the dark without someone seeing you. We'll get something soon. But they didn't. After thousands of interviews with people local to the area, as well as visitors from as far abroad as Japan and Australia, they had no concrete evidence. On the night of June 2, 1994, Shamsuddin Mahmud was working his second shift for the summer at Mumtaz Tandoori restaurant. Orkney doesn't have a big Asian community. In fact, Mumtaz was the only curry house on the mainland. It was a popular place with local families and tourists alike. And that Thursday night was rather busy. At 7 p.m., there were already about 14 customers. The restaurant was full of families and friends out for a night on the town. Smells of fragrant curries came from the kitchen while diners chatted and laughed. At about 7:15 p.m., Shamil's co-worker, Marion Flaws, was greeting customers at the door, then turned to go to the bar to fetch some menus. She heard a commotion and saw a man wearing a balaclava entering the restaurant. When she saw him, she thought it was a joke, but when she saw that he had a gun, she assumed he was there to rob the restaurant. Shamsuddin Mahmud was standing at a table, serving Donald Glue and his family their meal. It was a large table. Donald's wife, their children, and their in-laws were all there. The masked man headed straight for the waiter, lifted the gun, and shot him in the head as the diners looked on in shock. Shamil fell to the ground and died almost instantly. Customers thought the man walking in, wearing a black balaclava, was dressed up for fun, as some kind of joke. But once the gunshot was fired and the unmistakable smell of gunpowder lingered, they realized that this was no prank. After the shot rang out, Marion Flaws ran out of the door, out into the street. Minutes later, she saw the assailant come out of the restaurant. He hesitated for a minute, considered if he should go to the left or the right, then ran away. Marion saw him flee down the narrow lane behind the restaurant. Donald Glue and his brother-in-law chased after the gunman for a while, but fearing for their own lives, they gave up the chase. This was a cold and callous murder. The perpetrator had purpose and confidence. In fact, the immediate assumption was that he was a hitman. It seemed like a professional assassination. Witnesses were dumbfounded by what they had seen. Police interviewed all the witnesses, but there were conflicting statements in describing the gunman. The basic information they could agree on was that the man wore a balaclava and a dark-colored hooded jumper. The hood was pulled all the way up. The man's height was said to be 5'10" to 6 feet. That's between 1.77 and 1.82 meters. Other witnesses thought he was shorter. A couple of restaurant customers mentioned that he was hunched, or that he had a distinctive stoop, like a bodybuilder. A local man came forward and said that he saw a burly man in the alley leading to Mumutaz's restaurant 2 hours before the murder. The man walked out in front of him. He looked like a bodybuilder. He was muscular, and he walked with his arms out from his sides. He was in his late 20s and about 6 feet tall. The man turned to stare at the witness for a while. The witness felt threatened and uncomfortable. Another witness saw a man wearing a hooded top, loitering outside a public restroom on Junction Road, across the way from Mumutaz's restaurant, about 7 p.m., minutes before the shooting. It was one of the hottest evenings of the year, so seeing the man wearing a long-sleeved hooded jumper looked quite out of place. Eyewitness accounts differed. People remembered the man's appearance differently. Witnesses also saw a man in black clothes running away from the scene. By this time, the balaclava was off, and they could see the man had nutty brown hair. The last sighting of the gunman was near the Kirkwall Pier. Police would eventually search the sewers in Kirkwall. Along parts of the sewer, a grown man would be able to walk or run upright. It would be the ideal escape route to the Papdale Woods, a mile southeast of the town center. But after extensive searches were completed, they ruled out the possibility that the gunman went this way. Kirkwall police scrambled to start investigation into Orkney's first murder in 25 years. Violent crime was extremely uncommon on the island. Local police were simply not equipped to deal with a murder investigation, so they contacted their colleagues in Inverness for assistance. The task team from Inverness told Kirkwall police to preserve the scene and wait for their arrival. The investigators traveled by road 150 miles, or 240 kilometers, to Gills Bay, then took a 45-minute ferry ride. That's the nature of policing in the islands. They traveled through the night on June the 2nd and arrived in Orkney in the early hours of the following morning. They were briefed about the incident. Shamel was shot in the left eye, through his glasses. The bullet went through his head and lodged in the wall behind him. A single bullet casing fell on the carpet. Everything indicated that this was a targeted contract killing. But the million-dollar question, however, was, why? Shamel seemed nice enough. He was always kind. He was always friendly. Did he perhaps have a dark side? Potentially, he could have been in a gang, maybe? Police found it curious that the overqualified waiter seemed to always have had some money to spare. He lent over 3,000 pounds to his brother, who was a lawyer, so he could renovate his home. Then there was the rumored girlfriend in Orkney, who also borrowed money from him. Perhaps the girlfriend was the key. Did she have a jealous husband, or another boyfriend even? However, nothing indicated that Shamel had crossed the line. Nobody had any bad feelings or ill will toward him. Definitely nothing that would cause a brutal public execution such as this. Police had to look at a broader picture. Did something happen while Shamel lived in London or Southampton that caught up with him in Kirkwall? After hours of interviews and investigation, there was nothing that indicated that Shamsuddin Mahmud had a dark side. He was an innocent victim. Nothing in Shamel's life suggested that he had any trouble coming his way. But without a motive, chances of finding the person responsible for his death would be near impossible. That's when the theory emerged that it could possibly have been a racially motivated hate crime. Did his murder have anything to do with the fact that Shamel was Bangladeshi? Fearing that the gunman had a problem with people of color, the Mumutaz's owner, Moinamia, went into hiding under police guard with his wife and children. "We are really scared in case whoever did this comes after us as well." The night before the murder, there was an incident outside Mumutaz's restaurant which could have been a crucial clue in solving Shamil's murder. Witnesses saw 2 or 3 men outside the restaurant around 8:30 p.m. having an argument with Shamil. The men had Scottish rather than Orcadian accents. Witnesses in the restaurant heard one of the men say, "I will shoot you." This sighting remains a mystery to this day. Police were never able to track down any of the men who confronted Shamil on the night before his murder. The mainland was sealed off for 3 days. Everybody arriving or leaving by boat, ferry, or plane was checked. They had to ask everyone in Kirkwall for information too, but they were concerned that the perpetrator would leave the island as Kirkwall had an influx of tourists in the summertime. They went to every guest house, not only in Kirkwall, but on the whole island. Every single house was investigated. Extra police were brought in, and they searched the perimeter of the island, all the bays and all the inlets. Orkney Coast Guard and fishermen were questioned at length about the movements of boats on that Thursday night, and nothing out of the ordinary was reported. A cold-blooded killer was at large. Orcadians feared that he would strike again. In a place where no one locked their doors, people changed their habits and became more cautious. A dark shadow of suspicion fell over the whole community. What if the assailant was one of their own? The only concrete evidence in the case was the bullet and its casing found at the murder scene. Kirkwall police were fortunate to have a well-informed firearms expert, Constable Edmund Ross. He was tasked with identifying the bullet. Edmund Ross, or Eddie, grew up in Orkney and was an ex-army sniper and weapons expert. He was a former Royal Green Jacket and Special Branch officer who at some point in his career protected Prince Charles and Princess Diana. After Eddie left the army, he joined the police force and returned to his native Orkney. Everybody knew Eddie had a keen interest in firearms. He also owned quite a few himself, which he kept at his home in St. Ola near Kirkwall. His teenage sons shared their dad's passion, and they often went target shooting together. A part of Eddie's job as a police officer was to confiscate illegal firearms and destroy them. This would be done by sawing the weapons into smaller pieces and throwing the parts into the sea. After Shamsuddin Mahmud's murder, Eddie and the other officers confiscated all weapons on the mainland. Eddie carried out the tests by firing the weapons and comparing the marks of the bullets and casings to the bullet and casing found at the murder scene. But they could not find a match. In researching the origin of the bullet, Eddie Ross found that the 9mm bullet was made in India, at the Orkney Arsenal. This type of bullet was manufactured in 1972 and purchased by the British Army throughout the 1970s. One part in a batch of 4 million of these bullets was of inferior quality. The Army decided to dump most of it into the ocean. It was quite unusual that a bullet from this exact consignment was still in circulation, especially in a remote place like Orkney. On August 12th, 2 months after the shooting, Constable Eddie Ross was about to head home after working a night shift. Detective Inspector Chisholm asked him for an address for the Orkney Arsenal in India. As Eddie was the firearms expert in the team, the chances were that he had a directory of arsenals at home. But there was something else Constable Ross had to get off his chest that morning. He admitted that at his home, he had a box of bullets from the Orkney Arsenal, matching the batch number of the bullet that killed Shamsuddin Mahmud. When Eddie was asked why he had these bullets in his possession, he said that he could not remember. He thought that maybe he picked them up at his shooting center in Scotland, or perhaps that a local man in Orkney had given it to him. He said he wanted to speak to the man first before implicating him. Detective Inspector Chisholm was taken aback at how the information came out. They had been looking for matching bullets since the start of the investigation. Why did Ross wait so long to come forward? Eddie Ross claimed that, as a gun enthusiast who owns 11 firearms, he had loads of ammunition in his house. Investigating all the guns on the island had him distracted, and only when he remembered about the bullets in his possession did he come forward. Constable Ross handed over the Kirky arsenal ammunition. It was still in a sealed box, and the full amount of 35 bullets were inside. Soon after he handed in the bullets, Eddie Ross admitted he was given the bullets by an old school friend, James Spence, a retired Royal Navy officer who had taken the bullets when he left service. James Spence was interviewed 2 days later. Spence confirmed that he had taken the ammunition with him when he had left the military in 1980. He had given it to Eddie Ross some years later because he knew he was a gun enthusiast and thought he might have use for it. Spence said that he had given Eddie 2 boxes of ammunition, the bullets from the Kirky arsenal and another box of .22 calibers. As the box Eddie Ross had in his possession was sealed, with all of the bullets still there, Eddie could not possibly have had anything to do with Shambles' death. Although it caused quite a stir in the police force, this was not the break in the case that they were hoping for. 2 witnesses came forward, a mother and a daughter. They said that they saw a young man wearing a balaclava and a dark-colored hooded jumper behaving strangely in Papdale Woods 2 weeks before the shooting. Papdale Woods are located between the local secondary school and the school hostel, where pupils from the Isles stayed during the week. According to the mother and daughter, the young man ran around, mimicking what could be described as commando maneuvers. He would crouch behind a wall, then jump up and run to hide behind a tree. This went on for more than half an hour. Eventually, he took his balaclava off, and they saw his face for a brief moment. They also saw that he was wearing a white sweatshirt with a pattern on the hem underneath his hoodie. About 7 other secondary school kids also testified that they saw this man in the woods and thought it was odd, but didn't feel it was necessary to report it at the time. He didn't seem to be stalking them or hurting anyone. In fact, he was looking away from them. Police were determined to find out who this person was. They appealed to the public for help, asking more witnesses to come forward. About 3 months after seeing this man in the Papdale Woods, the same mother and daughter were having coffee at a cafe in Kirkwall. They saw a young man come out of a bakery and were convinced that he was the same person they saw in the woods before. Police checked the bakery's CCTV footage, and the mother and daughter confirmed that the customer in the bakery at 1 p.m. on September 8th was the same man that they had seen in Papdale Woods in May of that year. It wasn't hard to identify the young man. As it turns out, it was Michael Ross, Constable Eddie Ross's 15-year-old son. Michael attended the local secondary school, and his main ambition in life was to become a soldier like his father once was. They were a military family. Michael and his younger brother were members of the local Army cadets and regularly took part in shooting exercises. Police felt that it was time to search Ross's home, specifically Michael's room. The room was a typical 90s teenage boy's room with posters of Megadeth and Iron Maiden decorating his walls. There was also a deactivated 9mm submachine gun hanging on the wall. The piece was a gift that Eddie Ross had given his son. There was a notebook in Michael's room with the doodle of 2 chevrons for corporal and the name Ross on the first page. The O in the word Ross had a swastika drawn inside of it, and the 2 letters S in his surname were written like the Nazi Schutzstaffel, resembling thunderbolts. On another page was a picture of the Scottish flag with the words, "Death to the English," and further down the page the words, "Death cures all." All eyes were on Michael Ross as the prime suspect in the murder case that had baffled investigators. Was he a racist skinhead who killed Shamsuddin Mahmud simply because he was not white? Michael Ross was taken in for questioning on September 24th, almost 4 months after the killing. The 15-year-old denied committing the murder. He said that his dad had bought a couple of balaclavas and given one to him. He denied ever wearing his balaclava in the woods. In his statement to police, he says that on the night of June 2nd, he cycled from his home to the Papdale East housing estate. Around 7 p.m., he had met 2 friends from school, and they had a short conversation. He had told them that he had punched someone after a session at the Army cadets the previous day. From there, he cycled back home and arrived at 8 p.m. As he was cycling home, he could hear the sound of emergency vehicle sirens. Michael Ross admitted that he had fired his dad's 9mm at the shooting range before, but he did not own any firearms himself. Police were uneasy about this young man. They did not have enough evidence to charge him with murder. Months went by. But then, in December of the year that Shamel was killed, Michael Ross, with his father Eddie by his side, walked into police headquarters in Kirkwall to change his previous statement. Michael admitted that it was him in the woods acting strangely 2 weeks before the Mumutaz shooting. He explained that he was waiting for another boy from school called Jamie Wetherill, who had been dating Michael's ex-girlfriend. Jamie had been physically abusive towards the girl, so Michael decided to wait for him in the woods to give him a fright. He had no weapons on him, and the plan was to pin him up against a tree and threaten him, at most, punch him. He had hoped that it would stop Jamie from hurting the girl again. But the other boy did not show up, so Michael changed out of his balaclava and hoodie in the woods and went back to his grandmother's house where he had left his bicycle. Michael Ross also said that he had taken the same balaclava to school sometime after the Mumutaz shooting. He took it to school to show it to a friend. His mother found it in his school bag the same afternoon, and when his dad, Constable Eddie Ross, heard about it, he was very upset. Michael understood why his dad was so mad at him. It was not the time to take matters like this lightly. After Shamel's murder, some other cadets were mucking around about town, wearing their balaclavas, using torches as pretend guns and frightening people by jumping out of alleyways, shouting, "Boom." Michael took the balaclava to Scapa, not far from his home in St. Ola, put a stone in it, and threw it into the water. Police were certain that Michael Ross was the masked man who had killed Bangladeshi waiter Shamsuddin Mahmud. They set out to verify his statements and found that everything didn't quite add up. Firstly, the story about him behaving strangely in Papdale Woods. He said he was waiting for his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. Well, there was a young man by the name of Jamie Wetherill in the same year as Michael Ross. He had left the area several months before Michael was seen in the woods. Then there was Michael's alibi for the night of the shooting. He said that he had cycled around Papdale East and talked to 2 friends, but when questioned, the friends could not exactly confirm talking to him on Thursday the 2nd of June. On December 6, 1994, while at school, 16-year-old Michael Ross was detained in connection with the murder. He could not explain why his friends could not confirm that they had spoken to him in Papdale East at the time of Shamel's murder. He suggested that police asked his friend's brother, who might have seen him at the time. He added that his friend was cutting the grass at a house that wasn't his home. If Michael Ross had not been there, how would he know this? Again, police did not have enough to charge the teen, so he remained free. After questioning, he was allowed to go home, but the pressure was on, and they were more certain of Michael's guilt than ever. A month later, Michael Ross was asked to stand in a lineup. 3 witnesses who saw the gunman flee from Mumutaz restaurant moments after the murder were asked if they could identify the man. None of the 3 picked Michael from the lineup, as they all felt the suspect was older, between 25 and 30 years old. A month after the lineup, one of Michael's childhood friends came forward and said that she was out with him 2 years before. They were walking along the shore, and when she wanted to go onto the beach, Michael did not want to join her. He told her that he had taken one of his dad's pistols, as his dad was away and would not notice. He didn't want to walk on the sand and risk the gun getting dirty. In the meantime, things were tense at the Ross home. 3 months after Eddie Ross had handed in the Kirkley bullets that had matched the bullet used in the Mumutaz murder, his friend James Spence went to the police and changed his statement. Spence said that he had given Eddie 3 boxes of bullets in total. 1 box of .22 caliber bullets, and not 1, but 2 boxes of the Kirky Arsenal bullets. The 1 box was sealed, but the other box was not. Spence was not sure how many bullets were in that second box. When asked why he initially said Eddie only had 1 box, Spence claimed that Eddie Ross asked him to say that. Spence asked Eddie Ross if he still had the bullets he had given him. Ross allegedly said, "Only the one." Eddie Ross was adamant that he only ever took 2 boxes of bullets from Spence, but Spence insisted that there was a third. The day after the interview with James Spence, police searched the Ross home again, but couldn't find the open box of Kirky ammunition. 3 months later, Constable Eddie Ross was suspended from the police force. Neighbors and friends of the Ross family were outraged. They had no doubt that both Eddie and Michael were innocent. Why would Eddie tell investigators about the bullets if it could implicate him in the murder, and even worse, implicate his own son? Ross supporters were called the Mob on the Hill. They were very vocal about the fact that police were on a witch hunt and had apparently stopped exploring any other avenues in the case. It was unimaginable to think that a 15-year-old boy who was always seen riding his red Raleigh bicycle around the island could be capable of cold-blooded murder. And even more so, if he did in fact commit the murder as a young boy, how would he have been able to keep his composure after the event? He never broke down or changed his behavior. Friends also knew the Ross family loved their firearms, but they were a military family. Nobody thought their love of guns to be excessive or strange. Then in 1997, Constable Eddie Ross was charged with perverting the course of justice. He faced permanent suspension and jail time. Eddie Ross's trial was held at the imposing Inverness Castle. At trial, Eddie's son Michael was named as the prime suspect in Shamsuddin Mahmud's murder. The jury did not take long to find Eddie guilty, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. After 2 years, he was released, returned to Orkney, and found a job as an undertaker. Michael Ross remained free and finished high school in Orkney. As soon as he could, he applied to join the army and signed on with his dad Eddie's old regiment, the Black Watch Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Scotland. Michael quickly rose to the rank of sergeant and proved to be an excellent marksman. He was taken in as a military combat sniper. In his role as a soldier, he once guarded the Queen at Balmoral during her summer break on Royal Deeside. When he served in Iraq in 2004, he was the vehicle commander with the Black Watch Detachment. While driving in convoy one day, their armored vehicle was hit by a roadside bomb. Michael put himself in danger, administering first aid before organizing evacuation. 3 men in his battalion were killed that day. For his acts of bravery, he earned commendations. Once a murder suspect, he was now a war hero. At the age of 26, Michael Ross was excelling in the military. He had a wife and 2 daughters, and they were living in Inverness. The shadow of suspicion of murder did not seem to follow him anymore. But the Mumutaz case was far from over. In 2006, a local man walked into Kirkwall police station and handed in an anonymous letter. The letter said, "This is a true letter. I promise that I saw the person who killed the Indian waiter. I saw his face in full and the handgun. It was in the toilets at Kiln Corner. I have lived long enough with the guilt of not coming forward." The person was about 15 plus years approximately, white, and had a balaclava on his head, but still not turned down. He came out of a cubicle but went back in quick when he saw me. I looked over and saw his face in full. The handgun was natural polished metal or silver, like a big Beretta. This may sound stupid, but the way he held a handgun looked like he had handled a firearm before. I just don't know what to do. Worried sick witness. The Kiln Corner public toilets were across the road from Mumutaz restaurant. It didn't take long to identify the man who had written the letter. The police administration clerk who received the letter recognized the man who brought it in. The man was William Grant, a local man who said he had been out drinking at the pub on Junction Road on the night of June 2nd. He came out and admitted that the boy he saw that night was indeed Michael Ross. In addition to his statement about seeing Michael Ross with a balaclava and handgun on the night of the murder, Willie Grant also recalled seeing Michael and a friend outside of Mumutaz restaurant sometime in May, shouting racist abuse and threats. No other witnesses or restaurant staff could corroborate this story, however. Police wondered why Willie Grant waited 12 years to come forward. He said he didn't want to be the man who blew the whistle. With many local people supporting the Ross family, they would have ostracized him. Police felt they finally had enough evidence to charge Michael Ross with the murder of Shamsuddin Mahmud. His trial was held in Glasgow's High Court in 2008. By this time, the media had dubbed him the Schoolboy assassin. Although there was no forensic evidence and no murder weapon in this case, things did not look good for Michael Ross. Witnesses came out of the woodworks, remembering how Michael used to make racist remarks. He said that all immigrants should be killed. One witness testified that 15-year-old Michael Ross had once said, "Blacks should be shot and have a gun put to their head." Soldiers who only knew Michael as a grown man struggled to believe that he was a racist. While serving in the army, he had black friends. In fact, when a fellow soldier who was black died, Ross openly wept. Forensic psychologists testifying for the defense stated, "At the time of the murder, Mr. Ross was an immature 15-year-old who had no apparent personal link to the victim." Witnesses described the murderer as deliberate, unemotional, experienced, like a professional. And there is evidence from their accounts that this was not a random act of racial aggravation, but an organized and targeted act of violence against a specific person. A 15-year-old boy is unlikely to fit the witness's description unless he is exceptionally psychopathic and has experience of executing human beings. Unless Mr. Ross is an adept actor and considerably more able intellectually than his background history suggests, there is no evidence from the material I have been provided with and my interview with him to suggest that he fits this profile. In 2008, the jury found Michael Ross guilty, and he was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. But this experienced soldier had no intention of going to jail. As soon as the verdict was delivered, he jumped over the dock and made a run for it. Court guards managed to apprehend him near the exit. A guard tackled him and he was taken into custody. After he was in prison, police discovered a car rented by Michael Ross that was parked in a Tesco car park, not far from the court building. In the car was evidence that he was well prepared to escape. They found camouflage gear, weapons and hand grenades, a tent and camping equipment, as well as some money. His plan was to, in the event of him being found guilty, run to his car and go off-grid. Years of military escape and evasion tactics had taught him a thing or two. He was heading for the hills. What concerned authorities was the fact that there were weapons and ammunition. If captured, Michael Ross was prepared to go down in a hail of gunfire. One of the weapons found in his car was smuggled into Scotland. Ross admitted that he had brought it from Kosovo, hidden in the back of a television set. Michael's dad, Eddie Ross, denies knowing anything of Michael's plan to escape. Both Michael and Eddie still maintain their innocence with regards to the Shamsuddin Mahmud case. Michael Ross tried to have his conviction overturned. He claimed a miscarriage of justice. His appeal was rejected by the Scottish Criminal Cases Review. He received a final refusal to refer his case back to the Court of Appeals in 2015. Shortly after this, while in prison transit from Shotts Prison to Monklands Hospital in North Lanarkshire, Michael reportedly tried to escape, but he did not succeed. The van was brought to a halt, and guards managed to regain control of their prisoner. In 2016, he was planning yet another escape. In his time in prison, he was known to be a model prisoner. He earned the privilege of working in a tool shop, giving him access to power tools. Over time, Michael had made a replica of an angle grinder from wood. It was done so perfectly, he even painted a tiny Bosch label on. He replaced the actual grinder with the replica so nobody would notice that it was missing. Then, he took the real power tool to his cell, hoping that could cut through his cell's bars. But when a weekly audit was done, guards discovered the wooden angle grinder and rounded up all the prisoners who had been working in the workshop. Michael Ross freely admitted that he was the only one they were looking for and told them where they would be able to find the real tool. As recent as July of 2018, he tried another desperate escape attempt. He tried to scale a big fence and simply run away. But that plan was too ambitious, and it didn't take Shotts prison guards long to pull him down from the fence. There are many supporters in Orkney who are actively campaigning Michael's release from prison. There are two main points of contention. Firstly, the issue of the assailant's height. There were more than 20 witnesses on the night of the killing. Most of them felt that the gunman was a muscular man of about 5'8" to 6 foot tall. Michael Ross, as a grown man, is only 5'7". At 15 years of age, he was perhaps even slightly shorter than that. In fact, photos taken of him at 16 show Michael to be shorter than his younger brother. The other issue is that of Shammel's background. Supporters of Michael discovered that Shammel's journal was misplaced in the course of the investigation. The journal reportedly had information that alluded to the fact that Shammel feared for his own safety. There were a number of witnesses who told police early on in the investigation that Shammel seemed uneasy and preoccupied in the weeks leading up to his murder. Earlier this year, June 2018, top human rights lawyer Amr Anwar decided to take on Michael Ross's case as a wrongful conviction. The Justice for Michael Ross group, or J4MR, raised £20,000 through crowdfunding to pay this high-profile solicitor. Although this murder occurred more than 20 years ago, this case still divides local opinion. Those who know the Ross family stand firmly behind Michael and believe in his innocence. The mob on the Hill is as active as ever in their pursuit to have Michael Ross acquitted. But others believe that the right man was convicted of the murder, but may not be too vocal about it around St. Ola and Orkney. Police and prosecution too feel satisfied that the right man is behind bars. But Michael Ross vows to never give up the fight to clear his name. Shamsuddin Mahmud's family still miss their kind-hearted brother and son, and the doubts in this case does not make losing him any easier. If you'd like to learn more about this case, have a look at the resources used for this episode in the show notes. Also, visit and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Evidence Locker Podcast to see more about today's case. If you like our podcast, please subscribe in Apple Podcast or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. We would also appreciate it if you could review the episodes, as it gives us some street cred in the world of podcasting. This was the Evidence Locker. Thank you for listening.